I think we're in for really a treat tonight, um, and it's really a privilege too. So Harry Kraemer is our speaker. Many of you know Harry. I've got some ex-Baxter colleagues here with me, so I know you guys know Harry. Um, so Harry and I were just talking, and Harry said he wants this to be really informal. We're not going to use any slides. Um, Q&A goes the whole time. So Harry said, if you've got a question, just stop him in the middle of what he's talking about and ask the question. So let me go ahead and get Harry introduced. So it's really a privilege to have Harry with us tonight. Harry is an accomplished Christian business leader. He's an author, a speaker, and a friend. He's a former CEO and chairman of Baxter International, a $12 billion global healthcare company. And my former boss, truth be told, my former boss's boss. Harry is currently professor of leadership at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. He's an executive partner with Madison Dearborn Partners, a large private equity firm that's based in Chicago, and he serves on numerous boards of directors. His most recent book, and this is book number 3, right, Harry?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Harry's most recent book is entitled "You're 168: Finding Purpose and Satisfaction in a Values-Based Life." It was just released this year. Harry and his wife Julie live in the Chicago area. They've got 5 grown kids, and they're all in the Chicago area as well. I would tell you from my observations working at Baxter when Harry was running the company, I would characterize Harry as a faith in action leader. So in the workplace, Harry was open about his faith. He led by example. We got one more person in the waiting room. He values everyone. So I think Harry would know anyone from the board of directors down to the janitors, and treated them all with respect. And I think as a result of just his actions, he was and I'm sure continues to be a winsome ambassador for Christ. So and that's sort of what the topic of Harry's talk is. It's entitled "Becoming a Christian Leader." We'll do Q&A throughout the talk, and then we'll open it up to Q&A after the talk if all of the questions haven't been answered. Harry, is there anything else that I should say that I didn't say?
No, it sounds great, Mike. It sounds great.
Okay, so I am going to turn the floor over to you, and when you wrap up, if there's questions that haven't been answered, we'll get into Q&A. So Harry, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Well, it really is my pleasure to be with all of you, and I see some familiar faces, and if some of the folks that don't have their picture on, they want to turn their picture on, I can see some even more people. So if people are willing to turn their pictures, there we go. So no, it really is my pleasure, and I think I'd start off by just saying that I really pray that all of you and your families and loved ones are safe and healthy. I mean, boy, oh boy, we've been going through an amazing process. In fact, when people ask me, as I'm sure they ask you folks, caring people every day, well, how are you doing? I've gotten used to saying lately, how am I doing? Well, let me think about this. 1.5 million people around the world have died. 300,000 Americans have died. 25 million Americans are out of work or underemployed. How am I doing? I'm pretty blessed. And I think it's really a question of how do we take care of a lot of people that are a lot less fortunate than we are. And I have to always remind my 5 children, I want to be sensitive, but I have to kind of remind them if their biggest problem is they can't go to the movies or the fitness center, that these are sort of first world problems. Okay. I mean, I think we're pretty fortunate where we stand. And I think, and at some point we can talk about, as some of you know, there's a lot of folks who think this is going to get over real quick. I think we've got another 6 to 9 months of this, and just planning on how we deal with this is something that maybe we can also talk a little bit about. And as Mike said, I would really love to make this very informal and really have a dialogue. It'd be great if we could all be together in the same room. We can't. But I tell my students, I just finished up one last night with 115 students. So instead of one screen with 12, I've got 5 screens of 25 on each one. And I tell them at the beginning, we're going to pretend we're in the same room. Okay. So, rather than having to type something in, you take yourself off mute and we can have a good discussion, almost as if we were in the same room. And what I think most of us have been around long enough. We know how fortunate we are, because some of us, if you remember, Mike, if we would do video conferences to some of the manufacturing facilities 20 years ago, the screen would jump back and forth. There was a delay. I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, the fact that you can now get 100 people on this in different countries and have the clarity we have is a gift. I mean, it's remarkable. So definitely don't wait till later as I'm talking about these things. Jump in anytime. And the warning I give all of you, and Mike may remember this from Baxter, I always say I have very, very few answers, but like all of you, I have many opinions. So I don't do Q&A, question and answer. I do a lot of Q&A, question and opinion, and I'm willing to share my opinion on a lot of these topics. And 2 opinions I always mention to executives and to students is, the first one is all of you know, the more opinions you get, the more perspectives you get. I think that really helps our growth, right? Because you get a good understanding of what different people think. But then my second opinion is, it's good to understand the bias of the people you're getting the opinion from. Then you can decide, well, how relevant is that? So, as Mike said, I went to Baxter for 2 years as a junior financial analyst. I forgot to leave and was there for 24 years. Okay, and that's how I ran into some of you. I distinctly remember going to the FDA with Mike one time, and I think we stopped at White Castle on the way home, because I can't go past the White Castle without getting a few burgers, Mike, if you remember that.
We got a case of burgers.
We got a case of burgers, right? There was a lot of us in the car, so we got to share. It's like my 5 kids, and Mike, you ate quite a few of them, if I remember correctly. Yeah, we had a good time. And so what happened to me before I came to Baxter, I actually went to Northwestern, to Kellogg, and I was a math major in college. I went to a small college in Wisconsin, Lawrence University. I was a math major there, and the only reason that's important is the way I paid my way through Kellogg is I graded all the finance papers for the faculty, because if you're a math major, the one thing you know is numbers. So that worked out great. And when I was graduating, the fellow who became the dean at the school, a famous fellow by the name of Don Jacobs, I thanked him and said, hey, thank you for paying my whole tuition. I'm out of here. I'm going to Baxter. And he said, you're not going anywhere. Baxter's in Chicago. I know where you live. So for the 25 years at Baxter, he would call me every 2 weeks. And he'd say, I need you on a panel. I need you to be a guest speaker. And I made the mistake of saying, hey, if it hadn't been for Kellogg, I probably wouldn't have been the CEO of Baxter. He said, I'll never let you forget that. So 2 weeks after I left Baxter, I think it was 2005, 2 weeks after I left, I got a call from the dean, and he said, hey, this is great that you're leaving. I said, why is it great? He goes, because I want you to teach. And I said, you don't mean like have a syllabus, grade papers? That's not happening. I run companies. He said, I think you said you do whatever I told you to do. So here I am. And I've been teaching at Kellogg now for 15 years, which is amazing to me. He thought, Mike, I was going to do finance because of my finance background. And I had been well, people say chief financial officer, but if you remember, Mike, my title at Baxter was CFO cash flow officer, if you remember. So he thought I was going to do finance. And I said, look, you got all these brilliant PhDs. I have an MBA. I can't compete with these folks. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, you know what I think I developed at Baxter, I said, I would love to focus on leadership, value, and ethics. I said, I think the world needs more value-based leaders. And he said, that's fine, but you start in 2 weeks, so you better get a syllabus together. So I spent 2 weeks getting a syllabus together, and I've been doing this now for 15 years. And I realized if we needed value-based leaders 15 years ago, I'm not going to get into politics, but I would say the exponential need for value-based leaders is pretty remarkable today. So I told the dean the other day, I'm 65 now. I said, God willing, I'd love to teach the next 20 years. So I'm gearing up to do this for quite a while. So the thought process here, when I talked with Mike, was to talk about, basically becoming a Christian leader. And I know we got a lot of Christian leaders on this call. And I thought, you know what, it's always good to kind of review what are we really talking about. So I'm going to give you some thoughts on this. And as I said, jump in and we can take this any way you'd like. Every time I give talks, and I do a lot of them, people always say to me, well, what are your audio AV requirements? Well, what about your slides? And I always tell Mike, I've been teaching for 15 years. I teach 4 classes every quarter all year long. I have yet to make one slide. I don't do slides. I have a couple of pages of notes. That seems to work pretty well. That way we can do in the order of whatever you folks bring up things. So in thinking about this Christian leader, I break it up into two words, right? Christian and leader. And I first start off with the word leader, all right? And that's a word that I think people get confused about sometimes, because in one of my recent classes, a young woman came up to me after class and she said, Professor Kraemer, no, Harry, well, Harry, I got a real problem. I've read 3 of your books, I'm reading the articles, but I got a real problem. And I said, Jean, what's the problem? She said, well, I don't have anybody reporting to me. I mean, I'm going to take good notes, and when I have people reporting to me, I'll jump in action, but I don't have anybody reporting to me now. And I had to explain her something that all of you know, which is a very strong opinion of mine, that leadership has nothing to do with titles and organizational charts. Leadership has something to do with the ability to influence people. And the only way you can influence people is you have to be able to relate to people. So my whole leadership model is really 3 words: leadership, influence, relate. If I can figure out a way to relate to Steve, maybe I can influence him. If I can influence him, I can lead him. And I think that whole ability to think about leadership as, do I have the ability to get people to trust me? Do I start to have credibility? Am I somebody that's open and willing to admit what I know? Am I willing to admit what I don't know? Or am I an egotist or a narcissist that it's really all about me? And I think that ability to take the time to think about that is a very big part of leadership. The other thing I'd mention about leadership is, if you think about it, I realize leadership isn't a destination. It isn't, okay, check the box, that's another degree, now I'm a leader. I kind of believe every day God gives me, every day I'm given, I can become a better leader. And so I often think of it not as a destination, but as really as a journey. I mean, how can I get better at leading other people? And a big part of being able to lead other people, I think, starts with the ability to lead myself. So that's a couple thoughts related to leadership. I spend about 30 hours talking about this, but Mike said this is a very, very bright group here. You can cruise through a lot of this stuff pretty quickly with this group. And knowing some of you, I know I can do that. So we can get into that a little bit more if you'd like. But now let's talk about the real key word, which is being a Christian leader. And what I realized right up front, Mike and I talked about this briefly, I know, and maybe you do, I know a lot of very, very good Christian people that take their faith very seriously. They realize we're here for a blink of an eye. They realize that we're trying to prepare for eternity with Christ. But you know what? I kind of have to separate that in my day-to-day life. I'm working, I'm in a company, I'm doing something, and I got to keep this separate, because particularly in the United States, we've got this church-state thing, and we got to be a little careful how we talk about this. And I decided a long, long time ago that I don't know if that really makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're a strong Christian and it really is the center of everything you are and who you are, I don't know how you kind of separate that or put that, on the desk for a while you're now at work. So my opinion is, if it's part of who you are, you ought to just shine the light on that. And what I will call a very, 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 that's 3 varies, respectful way. And this is something you guys can actually challenge, because it really is an opinion. Other people may think of it differently, but I will be very respectful, okay? I'll be very respectful that somebody happens to be Jewish or Hindu or Buddhist. I'll be respectful if the person happens to be an atheist, fine. Now, I actually believe, though, through my behavior and the example I set, maybe if done the right way, I can bring more people to Christ. But I'm going to do it. I'm not a street corner kind of guy, but I actually believe that through your example and what you do, particularly if you're in a leadership position, you can have an enormous impact. And what I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit of how I do this with students and executives in a lot of these classes now. And the way I talk about this is I try to get people to think about, what does it take to be a value-based leader? And I'll take you through a little bit of what I usually do. I'll usually say to a group like this, I'll say, well, hey, I don't know all of you, but I would guess, and this is just a guess, that every one of you probably has at least 2 or 3 times the number of things you'd like to do than you're ever going to get done. I don't mean to disappoint you, on a Tuesday evening, but if you think about your career, your family, maybe your spirituality, your health, exercise, a little sleep, a little bit of fun, maybe realizing we're here for a blink of an eye, maybe you feel a moral responsibility to make the world a better place. There's a lot to do. And when you realize there's a lot to do, and you're as conscientious as I know all of you are, the usual reaction is, well, I'll just go faster and faster. Right? This is where the multitasking kicks in, right? And then, of course, we got these little devices, right? Blackberries, Blueberries, iPhones, iPads. And the great lie about these little things is, well, it'll make us more productive. Well, here's an opinion. It makes us more active, that's for sure. But how much more productive are we? Okay. And by the way, I usually ask the students just to jot down this sentence and spend some time thinking about it. Have we confused activity and productivity? We're very active, but how productive are we? Or are we moving so fast, we have no idea how productive we are? That would take precious time we don't have. Let's just keep moving. And I literally get the students, executives to think and say, you know what? I think what this whole value-based leadership starts with is taking a little bit of time to be self-reflective. Now, we would all call it prayer, but this whole idea of being self-reflective and prayerful, I literally will tell folks, here's the deal. Take a little bit of time, even if you don't have a lot, but take a little bit of time, turn off the noise, get off by yourself someplace quiet, and ask yourself a few what I think pretty important questions. And I can send these all to Mike. But the types of questions, and they're all in the book, are questions like the following. What are my values? What's my purpose? No kidding around. What really matters? What's God really asking me to do? What kind of a leader do I want to be? What kind of example do I want to set for other people? And at least for me personally, I'm not capable of thinking about these things when I'm doing 10 other things at the same time. But taking a little bit of time to think about this helps me separate out activity and productivity. It helps me get from the roots to the trees to the forest. It helps me figure out how to prioritize what really matters. Now, if you're like many of the folks I talk with, at least the first time, because I usually go back to companies 2 or 3 times, but the usual reaction the first time, and you may be thinking of this, is, sounds great, Harry, but the problem is, I don't have the time. I just don't have the time for this, right? And of course, my challenge, Mike, then is usually, is it we don't have the time, or is this something we really don't want to do? This could get very sensitive very quickly, right? Because it could be a pretty big difference between what we say is important and what we're actually doing. That may be a little too close to home, right? But we're talking about leadership. Leaders are willing to challenge themselves, Mike. Leaders are willing to put themselves out there. That's what leaders do, right? And then, by the way, when we say we don't have the time, that's interesting because most of us usually commute someplace. A lot of us try to exercise. You can do this when you're taking a walk or going on a treadmill or whatever. And hopefully, a lot of us actually pray. So is it we don't have the time, or is it something we don't want to do? And I really do believe that taking a little bit of time to think about these things and what your purpose is really puts you in a spot where a lot of this stuff can actually make a lot of sense. Now, when I talk about, and Mike thought it was a good idea because we all have our own little journey. My little journey related to Christianity starts this way. First of all, I was very, very fortunate. My grandparents were very Christian. My parents were. My uncle's a priest. And from very early on, there's a lot of things you could do or not do, but it was really sort of the focus. And my uncle would come and visit us every Friday night and have a prayer meeting. We'd have dinner, and then he'd play cards. And the first inkling I can think about, Mike, related to this was a little story I often tell the students is I think I was about 13 or 14 years old, Mike, and every Sunday in church, they would talk about how we needed to pray for more vocations. We needed to have more priests. We need to pray. We really need to have more priests. And I remember being kind of a serious young guy, Mike. One Friday night, I grabbed my uncle, Father Francis, after dinner, and I said, Father Francis, I really need to talk to you. And he goes, Harry, what's up? I said, well, I've thought about this a lot, and I've decided that I'm going to become a priest. And he said, oh, this is fantastic. Jesus has called you. This is fantastic news. This is great. We had to say a prayer. I said, well, Uncle Francis, before you get too carried away, I don't really want to become a priest. I don't think I want to do that. But here's the way I'm looking at this. I said, I'm a simple math guy. I said, we're running out of priests. Somebody's got to do it. If any of my friends become a priest, we're going to have a major problem. I can tell you right now, trust me, you don't want these guys. So somebody's got to do it. I think I got the short straw on this one. And it was really amazing because he actually said to me, Mike, hey, sit down. I got to talk to you. He said, first of all, if you have a calling someday to be a priest or a minister, super. But he said, quite frankly, Harry, here's the way I look at it. He said, Harry, most of the people as a priest, and I talk to my friends that are ministers, most of the people we reach are the people that are already coming to church. And he said, they clearly need the help, and that's fantastic. But he said, I often wonder, what would it be like if I could go inside of companies, I could go inside of schools, I could attach and somehow, give that message through my behavior to make a difference in the world. And he said, here's my wish for you. I don't care what you do, but if you could really be an example for Christ in whatever you do, he said, I think that'd be a fantastic thing. Now, he died a couple of years later, Mike. He had cancer as a young guy in his 50s. But I thought, you know what? That sounds like a pretty good calling. And so when people would say to me, Mike, you're running a small division at Baxter, or a large division, or you're the cash flow officer, what do you get most excited about? I got to tell you, Mike, what most excited me was working with people like you and realizing through our behavior and the way we treated people and the way we did things, we could make an enormous impact. And I'll give you a couple of examples because it took me a while to realize, and some of you guys probably figured this out as well. When you are in a leadership position, I mean, whether you're leading 3 people, 5 people, or, we had 55,000 people at Baxter in 100 and some countries, I realized you have the opportunity, you have the blessing to impact an amazing number of people. Now, the problem is we know it. I mean, look in the newspaper every day, right? There's a lot of people in leadership positions and their behavior actually turns out to be not a positive example, but it turns out to be a very negative example. And that's one of the problems that I think our children and grandchildren now don't have a whole lot of examples of value-based leaders. And so what I tried to do was everything I would do, I would try to set an example, not realizing, Mike, the impact that could have. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One example, if you remember at Baxter, one of the things I started doing when I first became the CFO, I realized, no, this is not the chief financial officer, this is the cash flow officer. And the first week I was there, Mike, you may not have known this, but the first week I was there, I thought, okay, Baxter, we got all these divisions, we got all these manufacturing facilities, we got all these distribution centers, but I don't know if the left hand's talking to the right hand. So you know what? I'm going to write a letter, and it's just going to go to the top 50 executives, and I'm going to, in a very informal way, talk about what's going well, what isn't going well. And Kathy Strauss, my assistant, if you remember, Mike, literally said, I read this. I think you should send this to everybody. And I said, who's everybody? I think you ought to send to all 55,000 people. And I thought, whoa, I might as well put it in the New York Times. But let me clean this up. Let me, public company, I got to be a little careful. But I ended up deciding I'm going to put a little story in here about the kids, about the children. And when I talk about that leadership influence relate, it was amazing because the following week I was in Europe and then Asia. And I would always have these Q&O sessions, if you remember, these 30-minute, you can ask any question that you'd like, question and opinion. And half the questions were, well, tell us about the children. Tell us about what you're doing. And I realized, boy, that ability that you're not up at some exalted level. I mean, I'm only here because God put me in this role. This is not about me. It's about every single person in the company. Boy, the impact you could have. And a couple of fun examples that some of you may have remembered. One was I decided I'm going to do it every month, and I'm going to tie a story to something that's happening, and I think I called it On the Home Front. And it's interesting to me, as you folks know, you can put PowerPoint slides, you can give talks, but there's something about stories that people never forget. And to this day now, whenever I'm out at O'Hare Airport, I run into a former Baxter person from 20 years ago. They'll say, hey, I was just thinking about this story. In fact, I'll give you a couple stories in the last couple of months people reminded me of. The one fellow said, hey, I remember that story that had an impact on me. I said, what was that? Well, you were talking, Harry, about how we needed to be more flexible and that sometimes we got very rigid and we're not very flexible. He said, Harry, you told a story that you were teaching a Sunday school at your Christian church, and you were the guy who had to put the nativity thing together, and you needed three kings, and there were like 8 little boys who wanted to be the kings. And you said, well, wait a minute. Then you said, wait a second. We got to be flexible. Guess what? We're having 8 kings. That's what we're doing. We're rolling with 8 kings. You got to be flexible. And I got about 300 emails that Kathy got that literally said, you know what? You're the CFO of a $10 billion company. You're teaching Sunday school. Now my wife thinks I should be teaching Sunday school. And you realize, wow, I never would have thought that. But what goes around, and when people see things, it has a very, very big impact on other people. The other example of how no matter what you do, and you folks probably realize this, is that whatever you do in a leader, there are no secrets. In fact, my grandfather used to say, Harry, there are no secrets. Well, Harry, maybe 2 people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. Okay, that's what my grandfather would say. So there's not a lot of secrets. And here's a really good example. I use this one, I think, in a story. Will you guys hear me okay, Mike? Now you're muted, Mike. Yeah.
So
Okay.
for like the last 30 seconds, you were on mute.
Okay. Well, so thanks, Mike. So this thing works out pretty well. We made it this far. So what I was starting to say, Mike, is another great example of what happens with people out without not realizing the example that you can set was we would take all 5 children down to Florida for a week for spring break every year. And depending on how many kids you have, you bring 5 children down to Florida. You know, you're at the beach, but every 20 minutes you're going up because somebody has to go to the bathroom. So I'm making my 3rd trip up to the bathroom in an hour. And as I'm walking up with my 5-year-old, my daughter, a Baxter truck pulls into the lot. Well, I had made the mistake. She couldn't read well, but every time she saw Baxter truck, she said to me, Daddy, is that your truck? And I thought, oh, I have a lot of stock. Yeah, I guess it's my truck. Well, every time she'd see a truck, she'd start screaming, Dad's truck, Dad's truck. So this poor guy gets out of the truck and he says, is she okay? I said, well, no, she's fine. I work for Baxter. That's all I said, Mike. I work for Baxter. And I said, hey, we're here. Can we help you unload the truck? It turned out there was a dialysis patient there. And he was unloading all of the home choice stuff. And I said, hey, I'm here. So we took maybe 15 minutes to unload the truck. And he's getting back in the truck and he goes, what's your name? I said, Harry. That's all I said, Harry. Where are you? I said, Chicago. That's all I said. So that was it. He leaves. So the next morning, I don't know what it's like for you guys, but Julie had a rule. Hey, no email, when we're on vacation. So of course, Mike, I'm in the bathroom with the lights out and the door locked doing my email. I mean, I got to admit this, right? Somebody's got to do this, right? So I get these emails. It turns out I've got 500 emails from truck drivers all over the United States. And they're reading like, Harry, I'm in Dallas, Baxter. When are you going to come to Dallas to unload my truck? All right. And I thought, where is this coming from? So I called Kathy. I said, Kathy, what's going on? She said, hey, the phone's lighting up. They're calling in here. I said, well, how do they know it was me? I didn't say anything. She said, Harry, what did you tell him? I said, nothing. Harry, what did you tell him? I said, well, I said, my name's Harry. What else did you tell him? I said, Chicago. Harry, they got this thing called the internet now. Harry, they just looked it up. Okay, so you're going to be emptying trucks for the next 20 years. And I just realized just that power, the power of setting an example of how you want to treat people. Now, I mentioned a big part of this is self-reflection. And what I'd share with you on this one is, and this is where I really get to be able to spread the word, which works out great at Kellogg, because you got all these students and you don't know whether any of them have much of a religion or not, but it works out great. And I didn't realize this up front, but they'll usually say, okay, I get this self-reflection thing, but what do you actually do? I mean, tell me what you do. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I do, but it's an opinion because there's an infinite number of ways to do it. But I think you really need to do some self-reflection. Okay, but what do you do? So I said, well, what I do is I take 15 minutes. I do it every day. And I do a personal self-examination. I said, I'm not a morning guy, 5 kids, a lot of boards, a lot of teaching. I said, it's usually midnight. but I do a personal self-examination at the end of every day. I said, well, what does that look like? And I said, well, here it is. It goes like this. What did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And then the last one is, if God gives me another day, based on what I learned today, how will I operate differently tomorrow on whatever dimension of your life has any significance? As a father, as a son, as a spouse, as a Christian, as a leader, as a teacher, whatever happens for you. And of course, the students then will jump all over this and they'll say, well, yeah, well, when did you start? Did you start doing this when you were the SEAL? I said, no, I started doing this when I was at Kellogg. I started doing this 40 years ago. And they said, well, do you do it every day? And I said, yeah. I said, look, if all of us are at a party till midnight, before we jump in bed, most of us will brush our teeth because that's a habit. Well, this is a habit I've had, and I do it every night. And then another young woman said, would you write it down? I said, I write it down. I don't think you have to. I write it down because if I don't write it down, am I self-reflecting or am I just daydreaming, particularly if I've had a couple of glasses of wine? I'm not sure what's going on here. So I find writing it down to be particularly helpful. So now they're very, very intrigued, and they'll say, well, how did you get started on this? Which leads me, Mike, to the last story before we open this up. And I mentioned this, I think, in this latest book. But here's the story that happened to me. You guys may have had your own adventure here, but this is mine. So I mentioned I went to Lawrence University, small liberal art college in Appleton, Wisconsin. And I admit that when I was a senior, Mike, I met a young woman who was a freshman. In fact, it was actually more than that. It was her first day of school. I had the best job on the campus. I ran the circulation desk at the library. You couldn't take a book out if I didn't know who you were. It was a fantastic job. So I meet this young lady. I start dating her. The problem is I'm a senior, and I graduate 3 months later, and I move down to Chicago. So I tell my 5 children they cannot do this now. They can't. But 40 years ago was okay. Is that every other weekend I would hitchhike up to Appleton, Wisconsin, 183 miles from Evanston to Appleton, Wisconsin. So I did this for about 3 months. Suddenly I get a call from her father, this very intense Irish Catholic guy from St. Paul, Minnesota. He goes, I know exactly what's going on. You're spending time with my daughter. She's 17 years old. We need to spend some time together. I said, super, come on down to Chicago. No, you come to Minnesota, and I'm going to tell you what weekend I want you here. I said, super, super. So I went up to Minnesota, and I don't know if any of you have been in Minnesota the first weekend in December, but trust me, that was the first mistake I made. 10 below zero, crazy, snowing. I get off the plane, find this guy. Because, by the way, this is before the internet, Al Gore, right? I mean, I got a Polaroid picture of this guy. And I said, okay, Tom, nice to meet you. I would want to be real careful, be respectful here. Are we going to see a Viking game? He said, no. I've got the weekend planned. I said, what are we going to do? He said, we're going to go on a retreat together. I said, okay. I didn't say super. I said, what's a retreat? He said, we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about your values, your purpose, what matters. I just listened. And I thought, what am I getting myself into? And then he said something, Mike, that really upset me, but I was already there. He waited until I was there. He said, I should probably tell you it's a silent retreat. I said, what does that mean? He said, you can't shut up for 3 minutes. You will not be talking for the next 3 days. And that's when I asked myself the obvious question, how much do I like this guy's daughter? Okay. But I was a finance guy, sunk cost. I'm already there. I might as well figure out the relationship between this guy and his daughter. So I did this thing for 3 days. Most people can't believe I could do this, but I did this for 3 days. It was run by the Jesuits, very intense group of guys. And they would give you exercises. They'd say, okay, gang, there were 65, all men. They'd say, okay, I got an exercise for you. Just assume you're flying home, plane goes down. That's it. What would you have liked to have said to your significant other, to your children, whatever? Now, if we do that exercise here tonight for 5, jot something down. Trust me, guys, you got 3 days, nothing there but a Bible, okay, and a notepad. You take this pretty seriously, okay? And I'm starting to get upset. I'm wound up. Wait a minute, I'm not even on an airplane. What am I upset about, right? And at the end of it, the end of the 3rd day, when they get everybody together, they say, this shouldn't be a one-time exercise. You should do a personal self-examination at the end of every day. Here's how you do it. And it's 15 minutes. And I thought, okay, I'll do this for a week or two. I've done this every day for 40 years. Now, the end of the story, which you guys are really going to think I'm crazy, I married his daughter. We've been married now for almost 40 years. And the craziest part of all is like a lot of you guys, I was usually out of the country, at least a week a month. But for the last 40 consecutive years, wherever I am in the world, the first 3 days of this first weekend in December, I fly up to Minnesota and go on this 3-day silent retreat with my father-in-law, who's now 89 years old. And it's the 3 most important days. In fact, I did it last weekend. And the way I think about it, you guys will relate to this. If you think about in our business lives, we all had some type of a strategic plan, right? And then you got your operational, or how are we doing? How are we doing? What are the variances? Where are we? And I realized coming out of Kellogg 40 years ago, why wouldn't I do the same thing for myself? So once a year, I literally take the time to say, okay, I got 3 days, all right? If God gives me another year, what's going to be important to me? What difference can I make? Is it about success, or is it significance? Is it your resume, or is it your eulogy, or your legacy? And what should I stop doing? What should I start doing? And I jot it down. I take a lot of notes, and then I do my little 15-minute check-in, right? And it's funny because students will sometimes say, well, if every night you do a little summary of this, when do you have time to read these nightly reflections? I said, I got 3 days. Okay, I got 3 days of silence once a year. So I just take my notes from that year when I go on the retreat. And that is probably the 3 most important days for me, because in fact, it was kind of fun. One of the only issues I always had with Julie is on the way to having 5 children. I mean, I can remember we'd have 3 children and she's pregnant, and she'd say, Harry, it's fantastic you do this. I think this retreat's great for you. But this year, December, Harry, I read this Jesuit retreat in St. Paul, Minnesota. They do this 48 weekends a year, Thursday night through Sunday. So this year, it'd be really great for you to go a different week. And of course, I had to explain to her, Julie, that's the weekend I go. I mean, that's our weekend. The guys I go with. But being a very smart, Kellogg person herself, she said, but you don't talk to any of these people. No, I don't talk to any of these people, but that's my group. That's my group. And if you've never been on a silent retreat, I will tell you, there's something magical that happens, because where I go, and I know you can go like at Bellarmine, in Chicago, but where I go, it was interesting. I think it was the Pillsbury family up there donated this land on a lake to the Jesuits, and they've got like 4 or 5 like old cottages, old sort of like 1900, 1910 cottages that they fixed up, and then they built a chapel. And what I find fascinating is they've got all these walkways and paths. They've got a couple of acres, and that the power of not talking is pretty remarkable, because their whole focus is, hey, if you really want to get close to God, you got to stop talking. You got to listen. How can you, unless you stay focused, how can you do it? But what's interesting is on these paths where you walk, they've got quotes from the Bible in the rock, and you don't know what some of these people are going through. But I always remember the one that there's always 2 or 3 people. It can be 10 o'clock at night. There'll be 2 or 3 people just staring at this rock, and it's a quote. I think it's from Matthew, Mike, where it says, "What good does it a man to gain the world and suffer the loss of his soul?" And you just see people looking at this. You don't know. Did they lose their job? Did they lose their spouse? Is one of their kids, have a drug issue? And you just pat the guy in the back. There's no talking. There's no talking at all. But you really feel a sort of comradeship. And, having done this now for 40 years, it's really interesting to me, because, there's a lot of people that will say, you hear this a lot. People say, well, life's really short. Life's really short. Well, I know it's short, because when I started going on this thing, and I was 25, and you should never talk about ages, but, I'd be there and you'd see these guys like in their 40s or 50s and say, well, these guys are, they're really older. And then you'd see somebody in their 70s and you'd say, whoa, look at that person, right? Well, snap of the fingers, I went from 25 to 65, right? And I always say, snap of the fingers again, if I'm still alive, which I don't think I will be, I'd be 105. So I'm under no illusion how short this adventure is, okay? It's a short adventure compared to eternity. What example do you want to set? And how do you want to live your life? So that's a couple thoughts. Ms. Mike knows I literally could go on for another 3 hours, but since we said this was going to be a dialogue, not a monologue, I'll stop here. And remember, no answers, but a lot of opinions. Happy to share anything that would be helpful to the group.
Let me just open it up, and if any of you have any questions, while you're thinking about that, your silent retreat I mean, I can see that's so valuable, because I think most of us don't slow down enough to be able to actually benefit from slowing our mind. And it reminds me of the verse in Psalms that says, "Be still and know that I am God." You know, and that's you know, it's a perfect example. You know, I mean, 3 days of being still is, you know, you've been doing it for 40 years, so obviously it's something that you're finding very beneficial.
And maybe if you guys aren't familiar with it, it was interesting because I didn't know the background on this until I attended the first time. But the background or the history of this is very interesting. There was a fellow, and this is, by the way, this is like, I think the year 1500, 1520. So we're talking about 500 years ago. But as the story goes, there was a fellow, Mike, a young soldier in Spain, and his name was Ignatius. And as the story goes, he was a philanderer and drinker and everything else. And he was in the Spanish army, and he got hit by a mortar or whatever, was almost killed. They brought him to a monastery. And as the story goes, the only thing in the monastery was the life of Christ and the life of the saints. And as he's sitting there dying, he made a pledge to God that if I got through this and I survived, I'm going to give my life to Christ. That's what I'm going to do. So he recovered, ended up going to the seminary, and basically decided that, and he's from Loyola, so it's Ignatius of Loyola, which will make sense in a minute. And he basically said, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Rome, and I'm going to mention to the Pope that if they want to assign me to a church, fine. But what I really love to do is to bring Christ to the world as a missionaries and set up schools. And so that's why you've got hundreds around the world of these Loyola College, Loyola High School, whatever. And this is the fellow Ignatius of Loyola. And you may know this, and I didn't know it at the time, but to become a priest or a minister, usually you go 4 or 5 years. But what's fascinating is to become a Jesuit, it takes 14 years. And during that 14 years, among other things, you end up with 2 PhDs, usually one in theology and one in history or science, because you're expected to teach at high schools or colleges. And on the way to the 14 years, to get the person closer to Christ, he set up something called a spiritual exercise. And the spiritual exercise, Mike, originally was a 30-day silent retreat that anybody on that path for that 14 years to be a Jesuit followed. And then what they decided, I guess, I don't know, 100 years ago, hey, wouldn't that be great for lay people like us? We're certainly not going to go 30 days, but how about setting up a 3-day spiritual exercise? And what they do in this 3 days is that you literally follow the life of Christ from the beginning, the Gabriel coming to Mary, his birth, literally going up to Galilee, the Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount, the whole bit, all the way through coming back to Jerusalem, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension. And you literally walk through the life of Christ. And every part of the way, you stop and say, okay, now I just want you to focus on, they almost have this interesting thing where assume that you're there. Assume you're there in the garden with him that night. Assume you're there, at the foot of the cross. Assume you're there when Mary Magdalene opens the tomb. And you literally then have an hour or two to do nothing other than actually focus on it. And that's how he created these spiritual exercises. So that's a little bit of the background.
Harry, this is Steve. And I apologize. I have not read your book to start. Okay, but I'm curious. When I think of Christ as a servant leader. And what I'm trying to figure out is when you talk about value-based leadership, does servanthood play at all into that? And if so, how does that fit into your concept of value-based leadership?
Yeah, good question, Steve. Well, first of all, absolutely. In fact, I would say some of my colleagues, rather than calling it value-based leadership, they'll call it servant leadership. I almost view them, Steve, as an example. In fact, one of the exercises, Steve, that you'll appreciate, that gives you a good sense of this, in one of the classes, Steve, I say, all right, let's draw the organizational chart for a company. And what I do, Steve, is obviously, you start at the top, you have the CEO, and then you have, three executive vice presidents, right? So you draw that, and then you draw more, and you draw the thing. And I said, all right, now here's the deal. So you take that chart, and what I want you to do with that chart, I want you to flip it 180 degrees, okay? Because the whole reason I'm here as the CEO is to help these guys, help manufacture the product, help a customer. Because guess what? It's all about the customer, okay? And to your point, that whole idea of it's not about you. It's not about I'm on top of this mountain. What are you doing for me? No, it's what can I do for somebody like Mike who's trying to deal with the FDA and trying to make something happen so we can satisfy and serve a customer. So you're exactly right, Chief, and that's exactly what Christ was. I mean, he was here to serve us. That was his whole purpose, washing the feet and doing. And so this servant leadership thing, I find it particularly in a business school. I'll talk about servant leadership, Steve. I'll give them some articles, but the idea of instilling the idea that you better know what your values are. Okay, what do you really stand for? And we spend a lot of time talking, because I look at a lot of the things that go on today, Steve, and I realize a lot of this insanity is because people don't know what their values are. They have no idea because they've never stopped to think about them. What else?
Thank you. I was muted, so but thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no. And anything, Steve. I think that's a great point. That's a great point.
I'll just tag on to something you were just saying, maybe while someone else is thinking of a question, Harry. But Harry and I went through what was probably maybe for both of us the most difficult period as far as in our Baxter healthcare careers, kind of both of us on point in different ways. But I would tell you, if it had been anyone, I don't know about anyone other than Harry, but Harry's value-based leadership came through in spades through that, because in really the most difficult times, he was the same guy as he is tonight. And his objective was what can I do to make you successful? What do you need from me? And so he definitely that in a tough time, values-based leadership was pretty awesome.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike, and it's interesting, Mike, when we talk about how to deal in a crisis, and you and I have been through some of them. What's very interesting is, and this may sound overly simplistic, but I'll share this with you. I realized that very often where people get in trouble, and it goes back to Steve, your comment, if you don't know what your values are and you don't know how you're going to react when things go bad, you've got a real problem. And so what I realized, and I often will tease executives, Steve, I'll say, what are things that people do? They do more than they wish they did, but they don't seem to control it. And I talk about worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and let's not forget about stress. And I'll ask people, what do you know about these things? And they'll say, well, waste of time, drains a lot of energy, not really productive. But if you wait until it starts, it's hard to stop, right? So if you're worried about something, Steve, and I say, hey, Steve, don't worry, it's too late. But then if you go back to self-reflection and you realize if you're self-reflective, you can predict most things, right? If we're in a big company and there's making products, there's a chance that something could go wrong. So why don't we think about before they go wrong, what are we going to do when they go wrong? And what I developed to be able to deal with this worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress, I realized, okay, I don't know anybody, Steve, whose life goes like this. It just gets better and better and better. I don't know, maybe it's Mike. His whole life is just constantly getting better, right? For most of us, it's a little bit of a curve. It's a little bit of a wave, right? We all go through highs and lows. If I was going through mine, I'd say, well, hey, I meet Julie. We have 5 kids. I have the opportunity to work at Baxter. Well, unfortunately, my parents pass away. One of my children is sick. So there's a wave. So what I realized was, hey, wait a minute. Why would I wait until things go bad? So then I asked the question, and we'll see who wants to come off mute and answer this fairly easy question. When things are going really well, when things are going remarkably well, what's the one thing you know for sure?
It's not always going to be that way.
It's not always going to be that way, Steve, because mathematically, if it did, you'd be on this curve with Mike, right? No, it's gonna turn down. So, Steve, here was the secret. Here was my secret formula, Steve. I actually decided that when things, and this is pretty serious, when things are going well, what would I do? Two things, Steve. Number one, have gratitude, thank God, enjoy the moment, have a party, thank every single person involved, really enjoy it. But then ask myself the question, Steve, number two, what am I going to do when, not if, what am I going to do when things turn down? And I actually decided as part of this retreat, I'm going to do two things when things don't go well, Mike. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do the right thing. Now, we all know there's an asterisk attached to that. What's the right thing? So I better have people like Mike Parks and on the teams who can help figure out, okay, what should we do, all right? Because no one knows all the answers. That's why you've got a team. But number one, we're going to, in an uncertain world, we're going to try to do the right thing. That's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing we're going to do, we're going to do the best we can do. And again, I'm giving you guys the short version of what I do for 3 hours at Kellogg. But here's the secret sauce, Steve. And I'm very serious about this. If you can convince yourself that no matter what happens tomorrow, I already know what I'm going to do. I'll try to do the right thing. I'll do the best I can do. I'll try to do the right thing. I'll do the best I can do. I say that 10 times a day. I would argue, Steve, worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress can be significantly reduced. You can never eliminate them. Welcome to the real world, okay? And I think God tests us every day to see what our metal's like, to think about eternity, right? So it puts everything into perspective. And in fact, once in a while, students will say to me, well, Harry, how strongly do you think about that? And I hate to use this example because it sounds morbid, and I think you can tell I'm a pretty optimistic guy, but here's how I think about this, Mike. So I think it's Tuesday night. Of course, with this COVID thing, I'm a little mixed up what day of the week it is, but let's assume it's Tuesday night, Mike. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know, but what's my worst nightmare for tomorrow? My worst nightmare for tomorrow personally is, God forbid, something happens to Julie or something happens to one of my 5 children. Now, I hope it doesn't happen. I'll pray it doesn't happen. I'll do everything I can to prevent it. But if it does happen, I know what I'll do. I'll try to do the right thing. I'll do the best I can do, because I think that's all God's asking me to do. And what that really does is it significantly reduces worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress. And part of that, I think, was these retreats. Part of it, the other thing I felt I was very, very blessed by, I didn't mention this, my grandfather lived with us when I was growing up. And I really think we've lost something by not having the intergenerational relationships that we did, 50, 60 years ago. And it was really great, Mike, because when he lived with us and I'd come to work as a young guy, I'd come home and I'd say, Grandpa, you're not going to believe what they did today. You're not going to believe what they did today. And he'd look at me and he'd say, Harry, that's why they call it work. And then he'd hesitate. He'd get a little smile, a little Irish smile, and he'd say, Harry, let me give you some advice. Tomorrow, when you go to work, if there are no issues and there's no problems, you may not have a job. And I thought, yeah. So I never forgot that, Mike. So 15 years later, a lot of luck, a lot of, the man upstairs, I end up as the CEO. And if Mike Parks was an executive vice president and walked in my office and he said, Harry, we got a real problem, I would literally say, Mike, that's good for you, right? He said, how could that be good for me? Well, you still have a job, Mike. You're still okay. And I remember one time, in fact, I was at a party, Mike, and one of the guys that had been the general counsel, he said, Harry, I distinctly remember the first week you were the CEO. And I said, you do? And he goes, yeah. He said, it was kind of a crazy experience. I said, what was that? He said, I came into your office and I said, we got a real problem. We're going to get sued. We are going to get sued. And you said to me, well, that's really good for you, right? And he said, why, how could that be? And Harry, you said, wait a minute, if we never get sued, why do I need a lawyer? And I thought, yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. So, and maybe the last part, Mike, of putting it in perspective, people sometimes would come up to me and they'd say, boy, you got all of Baxter, you got 55,000 people. I mean, what keeps you awake at night? Mike, I used to tell people, by the time I go to sleep, nothing kept me awake. If it takes me more than 5 minutes to go to sleep, I'll read another book for a while. I do not have a whole lot of time for worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress. I really don't. I really don't. So what else? What else? Anything else? We could talk about anything. Any other thoughts you guys have?
You know, Harry, one other thing that I think of too is when things are going right, I try and be thankful more and communicate more, because I always think that people really tend to, they think that they need to rely on God when they're having problems. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but I'm going, what, am I just inviting more problems if I only go and talk to them when I got problems? I'm trying to say, well, I'm going to try and keep him on the good side. I'm going to, communicate with him when things are going good. I don't want to invite him to zap me,
Yeah,
So,
yeah. You don't want it to be, that's Steve complaining again. No, Steve needs something.
bingo, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, no. You want to pile up those thank yous. Absolutely. Yeah. You want to get something in the bank, Steve. Get it in the bank. Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
I thought somebody in a leadership role is always playing the what if game or that, and you can fill in the what comes after that. But you certainly exhibit the aspect of Norman Vincent Peale or that, and positive thinking is so much better than the opposite of that, because that is a demotivator.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely, Thor.
just
Absolutely.
puts the flames on the fire. And I try to stay away from the word worry. I try to leave that out of my vocabulary. I'll put the word concern, which to me is a little softer for that than worry.
Yeah. That's a great point, Thor. That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you got it. I mean, look, there's always things to be down about, right? Name the topic. Is the glass half full or half empty? People always say to me, Harry, your glass is 90% full, because I realize, no matter what happens, things could be worse. They really could. I mean, you look at what we've all been going through for 9-10 months, okay, with this COVID. I mean, it's pretty serious. As we said, 1.5 million people have died. We got all these problems and, whatever. I kind of look at it and say, all right, yeah, it's unfortunate. It's terrible. But if you study history, as you guys know, and the Spanish flu, it lasted 6 years and 35 million people died. You know what? All of us, we're pretty lucky to be alive in 2020 when we can come up with a vaccine in a record number of months, and we'll get through this. We'll get through it. Now, you got to be sensible. You have to think about what you're doing. But in my mind, there's so much to be thankful for, and complaining gets you absolutely nowhere. Gets you nowhere.
I think also from what I gather from your discussion of that you've kind of taken the Stephen Covey 7 habits and condensed it down to 3 you started out.
Yep.
That's the case. And I also, even being a PhD organic chemist, no, I'm not in the pharmaceutical industry, even living in Libertyville. So I have to contend with the Baxter and the Abbott people and whatever else is around there that maybe put me to the test or whatever. But as an individual that certainly follows the managing by walking around, or that you don't sit there waiting for people to show up at your doorstep.
Absolutely, Thor. And in fact, when I would say, and Mike knows this too, Thor, when people would say to me, well, how do you manage? I said, well, you walk around and you don't just let the 7 or 8 people you report to you really get a way to talk through and meet and people all the way throughout the organization. And Thor, it was amazing how much you could learn. I would go to lunch, and if on the Baxter cafeteria bulletin board it said softball game at 5 o'clock in such a field, okay, I'd show up, okay, and you got all these 20-something-year-olds. I had my baseball glove and my gym shorts and my sneakers in the backseat of the car. I'd go out and play. And, I'm running to second base. Some 23-year-old put some hard tag on me, and I almost like, and somebody said, hey, you ought to be careful. That's the CFO. And they said, oh, how could it be? I take my hat off. It is the CFO. And then when they'd say, about 15 of these guys, we're going to go out for pizza, I'd go out for pizza. Thor, it was really remarkable. I learned more about what was going on in the company, having pizza with those 15 people, than talking to vice presidents, right? Because once in a while I'd say, oh, Charlie, what are you working on? And he's working on a project. I thought I killed that project 3 years ago. Okay. And a lot of people who work for, as you guys know, a lot of people who work for you, some of the vice presidents, they're not bad people, but they kind of view their role sometimes as, well, we don't want Harry to worry. We'll take care of it. No, Harry Thor would like to know what the hell's going on. Okay, he really would. And if you don't get down there, you have no idea what's. You guys have heard that expression. What the emperor has no clothes, right? It's very easy to get detached, and I would literally make sure that I'd be doing those Q&O sessions everywhere I went, up and around Lake, and in Deerfield and Lake Cook, and no matter where I was in the world, because I just thought, keeping in touch with people that's the only way you know what the hell's going on, Thor. It really is.
Well, the large companies, at least when I started my career in the early 70s, there were 10-year plans, and those things got down to 5, then got down to a year, then maybe 6 months. Today, I think a lot of them don't even have a one-day plan.
Yeah.
You just have to ride the wave or
So Thor, did you work? Were you a professor, or did you work for companies, or both?
No, I didn't teach or anything of that. No, I'm in a green area of technology.
Great. Yeah. Well, I know it's approaching that time. If there's any last questions, more than happy to take them. And by the way, I'll mention, Mike, if it's helpful, because I do a lot of these talks at Kellogg, it was kind of fun. Some of my students, Mike, they actually set up a website for me. And I said, I don't need a website. I'm 65. I don't need a website. And they said, no, we're going to do this. So they set up a website. It's just harrykraemer.org. And all the reflection questions are there and everything. The articles are there. There's some videos. And when my friends saw it, they said, oh, my goodness, what did you pay for that? I said, I didn't pay anything. These students just put it together. Well, you ought to pay them. I said, okay. So I grabbed these 2 students there and I said, what do I owe you guys? And they said, you don't know us. I said, oh, no, you do owe us. You have to start doing a blog post. To which I said, what's a blog post? They said, Harry, we'll take care of it. Here's the deal. You send us an email every other week. We'll take care of it. So I don't know what they do, but I send them this email, and then they put these things online on this harrykraemer.org. So, in fact, if you look it up, the last one I wrote was all about the retreat. And because I just got back from it last weekend, and it's always fun because somebody will say to me, "Oh, I saw on Facebook or Instagram." I said, "I'm not on any social." "Oh no, you're on all of these things." So I don't know what these students are doing, but they seem to have me. They take care of it. I just write an email. It's keeping track of email and text is about as far as I go. It's about as far as I go. But you can look on that, and if you have any questions, you can follow it, and then. I respond to every email, so more than happy to interact with you guys if you send me an email, and it's an honor spending time with you guys.
Do you tap into some of those courses for the seniors or that? I forgot what that title is at Northwestern.
Yeah, at Northwestern. The Northwestern alumni.
I don't know what if there's leadership in the title, but it's.
Is it at Northwestern, Thor, or Kellogg?
Oh, yes, it's at Northwestern, right? It's at the main campus of that for seniors of that.
Yeah. Well, in fact, it's funny, Thor. My wife and I just completed one. It was a great one. It was all on the 60s. And I think it was a Northwestern alumni thing. And it was a complete course on everything from, Kennedy's inauguration all the way through to Nixon and all the
But you have to be an alumnus of Northwestern to participate? I mean, to even...
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think...
What I'm saying is open to the public, or that...
Okay.
I've never attended, but I know several others that...
Okay. All right. Well, send me a note. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to shoot me a note. And Mike, it was wonderful getting together with you guys.
Harry, thanks again for joining us. I've got a couple of takeaways, and you mentioned this a couple of times. You and I are tracking the same age, and it is like the blink of an eye. How did I get to be this age? And it happened so fast. But the point is that life is short, but eternity is not, and we need to live life in the light of eternity. Yeah. And then the other thing that struck me, and I think it was your uncle who was the pastor that said this, that he was envious of you having the opportunity to go into a more secular environment to be an ambassador for Christ too. And we all have that opportunity. We may not all be leading 55,000 employee companies, but we all have that opportunity. it's something that that we all ought to take to heart. I mean, that's we're commanded to do that in the Great Commission, and I think it's just something we need to.
Well, yeah, because we are about the same, Mike. And it's funny. I don't know about you, but if you're blessed and you take care of yourself and you exercise, I always tell folks I don't feel much different than when I was 30. I really don't. But it's just in the last year now, I'm starting to realize, no, I definitely am getting older. And somebody said, well, what's happening? So I don't know if you had the same reaction, Mike, but I guess it was just a couple of weeks ago. I love, for relaxation, I love to see like suspense thrillers or, James Bond. And when I saw the thing that Sean Connery died, I said, oh, Sean Connery died. Then it said he was 90 years old. And I thought, 90? How could Sean Connery be 90? Okay. So being a math guy, I had to look at the numbers. That's what I do. And I don't know if you guys know, but the first James Bond movie was Dr. No. Well, if you look it up, Dr. No came out in 1962. Mike, that was 58 years ago. Sean Connery was 32 when he made that movie, okay? So, of course, he has to be 90 years old. Oh, my God. And then I think it was just a couple of days later, Tom Seaver, if you're into baseball, I remember being 14 years old, growing up in Pennsylvania, 1969, the Miracle Mets, right? And Casey Stengel and this young kid, Tom Seaver, I can't remember who the 69, who they played against, but they won the World Series. And I'm thinking, this young kid, they're in the paper. Tom Seaver, 84 years old. It's like, how can this be happening, Mike, when you and I are getting older? So,
exactly. It is a blink of an eye.
Blink of an eye.
And there's the irony that you mentioned the Mets winning. If you look at that movie, I just caught some snippets of Oh God with John Denver and George Burns.
Yeah.
Burns playing God, and Denver questions him about miracles. He says, I don't do many miracles. Oh, but there was the 1969 Mets.
Yeah, that's great. Because we're old enough to remember. If you remember, they were like the first expansion team in 1962. And I think from 62 to like 67, 68, they lost like 100 games a year. I mean, it was just incredible. And I don't know what happened in 1969, but maybe it was Seaver, and I think it was like Jerry Kuzman. And these guys, they went all the way. They went all the way. So
Crane Pool. Well, the Cubs collapsed. That's what helped them.
Oh, that's right. Oh my God, that's right. Yeah, that's
wore them out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and see, that was before I moved to Chicago and became a Cubs fan. And yeah, you're right, Thor, because that's when I got an education. Because last story, I'll let you guys go. So Thor, I'm at the game, and of course I lose track of time now. I'm at the game when it looked like they were going to go all the way. And that Steve, whatever it was, reached out his hand, okay? Well, so it's really funny, Thor. I'm there, and I got two of my kids, and it was right before that happened. And I said to the kids, I think they're going to win. I think they're going to win. And there were three guys sitting in front of me that were like in their 80s. They turned around, and they said, we don't know what's going to happen, but something really bad is going to happen. Oh. And like a minute later, this ball is headed out. It's like, oh my God, here we go. And they turned around and said, that's it. And three of them actually got up and started to leave. And I said, no, they said, it's over. We don't know what's going to happen, but we don't want to watch this again. We've been watching this for like 80, 90 years. I can't sit through it again. And then right off that, remember, they lost. It was just incredible. Yeah.
You sure it wasn't Bill Murray sitting in front of you?
Yeah. That's all good. That's all good.
Harry, thanks again for joining us tonight. Thanks everyone for joining. Good to see everyone. Hope everyone has a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Stay healthy, and we'll
Merry
get to
Christmas.
the vaccine sooner, hopefully, rather than later.
Yeah. You guys all take good care, okay?
Thank you. Bye.
Take to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.